right, Judy, do we have the quorum then?
Yeah, you do have a quorum.
We'll wait 1 minute.
And it looks like it is now streaming live on Facebook. So
Okay, great.
that's good. Good job, team.
Well, let's get started then. We have to start off with the Legislative Audit Commission's Executive Subcommittee, our remote hearing as it relates to the Office of the Legislative Auditor performance reviews. And we're really here for a work session to lay out a timetable and the work plan so we can accomplish those goals. I would hope that, and I think everybody here was enthusiastic about putting this work plan together. And I want to use it as the continued work, as we talked about in our last committee meeting, is that the legislative audit is vital to the success, and you're our eyes and ears, our watchdog for all the citizens of the state. And then just so we can get a better understanding and use this opportunity for the annual review to talk about those things that are working for you, that aren't working for you, and to get everybody's input about where do we make sure, or the outcome, not only evaluating the last year's performance, but where do we go from here, and to make sure we're in full alignment with and that you're helping achieve our goals, because we, like I said, we do depend on you, and we know we have some key challenges out there, maybe where we need to try and highlight some focus areas. So from that perspective, unless Rick, would you like to add any comments to that before we get rolling and start to hammer out our work plan?
Thank you, Senator Cran. I think the key is, we adopted a policy last year, and now we have to figure out how to implement that. And I think a couple of questions are, who or what is the entity to do the administrative part of the auditor's review, and then the timeline for that, and then also the deputy auditor's review. And maybe there's an opportunity for Jim to give us an update just on if the other deputy or has been where that process is.
Mr. Chairman and
Mr. Nobles.
Representative Hanson, we posted the position twice, and we received 3 applications. We have an interview scheduled on Monday with one of the candidates. I think that shortly thereafter, I will be able to make a decision, notify you of the choice. We would like to have that person take some time and meet with each of you, if you're willing, remotely, by phone, however it works best for you. So I think we're going to be ready to proceed quite soon. I would suggest possibly considering the confirmation of the choice maybe in the November meeting, so that that person will have time, and you will have time to interact with the new deputy for the Financial Audit Division, or the one that I'm proposing. So that's where we're at.
Great, thanks, Mr. Nobles. Mr. Nobles, so are the 3 applicants, are they all current members of your staff, or do we have external applicants?
We had 2 external and 1 internal. And
okay, thank you.
So
great, thank you. Anybody else have any comments or questions before we move forward? Sorry, Representative Hanson and Chair, for the calling you by Rick in our first this informal Zoom meeting. We get too cozy when we're not sitting in our official headquarters. So it looks like, based on what we've adopted on November 15th, our goal is really to back into a plan and a work plan. We have laid out what the opportunity or our obligations are and the steps necessary. So November 15th is the date we need to back into, and to define what our work plan is going to look like, and what we want to what steps we want to take. But I think most of them are laid out in our plan. So we've got the comprehensive analysis, and I think Mr. Nobles, you are always extremely articulate when you provide us with the updates. And so I think in this case, we'll have to work out as part of the work plan. I think Rick, Representative Hanson, and myself certainly want to sit down and have that conversation as a part of the process. We also wanted to have, your review of the prior year's accomplishments. And again, I think to that, in the prior year accomplishments, I would like to see the list of those items that weren't accomplished or yet to be accomplished, or you think the obstacles that were incurred in that accomplishment, as well as those, kind of looking at our next year, laying the foundation about those things that we need to address as a commission, that hopefully we can clear path or really help guide what those priorities are in both our mandatory work responsibility and then, of course, all of the opportunity reviews or legislative reviews that you get on an ongoing basis. So I'm sure you already have it, but as we look forward to putting together that comprehensive document that shows us all of those special review requests, those that, kind of passed muster, where you actually took action on it, those that you didn't, kind of what are the reasons that you didn't. If you see a trend, if you could call those out to us, and then at the same time, let's lay the foundation for the future, for the future year's work, both on our side as the legislative responsibility, and then as the commission responsibility to help make sure you guys are as effective as possible for us. So with that, anybody have any questions? Wow, you guys all just waiting for lunch or awful quiet today. Representative Hanson?
Yes, and I don't know if we have Mr. Bodden and Mr. McCormick on, if they could maybe give us, they were involved in helping write the policy, maybe just a description of, if they're on, to describe how they handle high-level performance reviews at their level. And I think it's important to have both the House and the Senate. We are bicameral and bipartisan to seek their input on process if they are here.
Well, that'd be one. Thanks, Representative Hanson. Mr. Bodden, it looks like you're all ready to go.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I think one thing I would emphasize for members of the subcommittee is that this is relatively new territory to formalize a review process like this with a written policy. Practices have varied throughout the years. On the Senate side, I think there is an increased focus in performance appraisal internally with the new Director of Human Resources in the Senate, Annette Gratke. And as a result, I guess what I could speak to very, very personally, I suppose, is my own performance appraisal. In this instance, I report to the Senate Rules Committee. And in that instance, the chiefs of staff for each caucus in the Senate collaborated, and my appraisal was delivered to me with both of the input from both of them. And I think there was an effort to rely fairly heavily, I'll be candid about that, on a self-appraisal that I prepared, and then to receive additional input and comment from others who I work closely with. So it's a little less formal than the policy you see in front of you. I think the formality in that policy is a good thing to ensure consistency. I hope these comments are helpful, but that's basically kind of the Senate perspective on this. I would say there's a trend in the direction, it's moving along in a direction similar to where the OLA is headed with this policy.
Mr. Bodden, so a question for you on the, you had input from the leadership or kind of oversight and then others. What was the form? How form did that input come in? Was it written, oral, personal meetings? What was that? How was that accomplished?
So, Mr. Chairman, and yeah, that's a great question. And of course, I think one of the principal challenges here is it can be a very time-consuming enterprise. It was basically, discussions related to me through the appraisal process. I didn't see anything in writing. I'm unaware of any effort to, formally gather that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Mr. McCormick, are you on?
I am
there
on.
You are.
I
Your
guess I would
thoughts?
suggest that the key thing is to make sure that when you're in the position in mid-November of coming up with the results of the audit, that you've
Mr. McCormick, you went mute for a minute there. You're still muted. There you go. Looks like you're unmuted now.
Okay, on my computer it says I'm muted, but you all say I'm unmuted. Okay, so I think working back from November 15th is a good idea. You need to make sure that you have the information that you need to make the conclusions that you will make then. And the outline here is fairly prescriptive, that you need to start with an essay by Jim Nobles. And that's good because the person you're evaluating has most of the data that you're going to need to evaluate them. And so make sure that if there's anything specific you want from Jim, you let him know in advance so that his memo is pertinent. It requires that you include observation and feedback provided by the auditor's staff. And we've done this type of thing in a very low-key manner. And the chiefs of staff who evaluate me sometimes will reach out to senior members of House Research and just ask, how's Patrick doing, and have a short conversation. Is there anything we should know? Once again, you don't want to put them in an awkward situation, but if there's facts or information that they can bring to the table, you can designate one or two of the members of the committee to sit down and talk with some of the senior folks at OLA. And if there are people you know or people who have reached out to you who want to weigh in, that's fine and acceptable too. And I think at that point, it's a kind of an art rather than a science to decide if you know enough about how this has been handled in the last year, about Jim's performance to make a judgment. I think then you're done. If you need more at that point, you might want to reach out to Tom and I to see if there are suggestions for ways to get more information. Your goal is, I think, important. It's important to note that a goal of a personnel evaluation is to help the person perform well in the coming year. And I always try to make my evaluations upbeat and useful to plan the next year's activity. So we want Pat McCormick to do different things in the following way, and that would be more useful if your office communicated in a different style, or there's some challenges that you need to personally address that would make House Research better for the House in the future. And those kind of upbeat but useful corrective statements in an evaluation allow the person who's being evaluated to know how you're going to how they can legitimately take a next step to better serve the legislature. So I think that's kind of my summary. The last point is every speaker, every chief of staff does it slightly different. They have their own style.
Great, thank you, Mr. McCormick. Anybody have any questions, comments, additional comments? Let's just working through our calendar.
So I just would comment. Well, first of all, I came in right at 1 o'clock, but I don't know if I missed something because it seemed like you were already talking at that point. But I do really think it's important to include this element that Mr. McCormick just mentioned. I think that that's a key issue. And I totally agree that this is about everybody. This is for the person evaluated primarily. I think we all deserve to get some input into our performance and make sure that we're meeting expectations and get help to continue to develop. I always feel like if I don't continue learning in this job, then it's time to quit, when I'm not personally growing. And I don't know if everybody feels that way, but I kind of think that if we're going to give people the opportunity to grow in their jobs, they need and deserve feedback. So I like that. I just, and I do think we need to strike a balance with the time invested, and also there's an awkwardness factor of being evaluated in this, 360-degree format too. So I do like the idea that we would perhaps designate a member or two members of our or somebody to actually touch base with each of the senior staff and, you know, people that report to Jim, just to say, you know, got anything you want us to know? How are things going? You know, so that we can incorporate that and in a helpful way, if there's anything to incorporate. And, you know, I think that's a good balance. So I'm just not sure how we're going to systematize this. I mean, I'm always conscious of the fact that, you know, we legislators actually have a part-time job, and most of us have a lot on our plates besides the, you know, what's going on formally. And I just want to make sure that we systematize this in a way that allows us to actually carry it out, because, you know, I just don't want to see us drop the ball on this. And I know that we all are busy and get distracted. And so we need to make it really clear how we're going to proceed.
Mr. Chairman, might I ask?
Thank you, Representative Labeling. Mr. Nobles?
Well, you know, as director of this office, I have to do assessments and engage in personnel matters a lot. And our office is covered under the Government Data Practices Act. I think we're the only legislative office that is. That's a whole topic we could talk about some other time. It creates a great deal of complexity for us, legal liabilities, not only in our obtaining and storage of data, but also answering data requests from people. My point in bringing it up is that in our operation, because we are covered under the Government Data Practices Act, personnel matters are not public. The legislature and you as a commission, I don't believe that you are covered by the Government Data Practices Act. So I guess I would ask Mr. Boddern, anybody else, Mr. McCormick, what are the rules of confidentiality? I'm sure that this will occur when some of you or some agent representing you asks for a confidential assessment, and I want them to give it to you. I want them to really tell you exactly all the things that they're feeling about my performance and their work environment. But confidentiality does help. So again, I guess my question is, what are the legal protections or policies that the legislature, House and Senate have established for these kinds of things?
Mr. Chair, in the House, all personnel matters are confidential. The fact that the legislature is exempt from the Data Practices Act means that we don't respond to a data practices request in the same way that a state agency would. However, we often provide materials and information to the public exactly like a state agency would. For example, a number of per diem payments a member has received, reimbursements that members have received. But we apply confidentiality to all personnel matters. So my work in evaluating somebody is confidential. My notes go into a file that's held. And if I interview somebody about another third party, that is confidential and I can't share it. The exceptions are I could share information with the head of personnel, Kelly Knight, for the House. I can share information with our personnel attorney, Marta James is her name, and they have protocols for when they can share with leadership. And often they might just share summary information with leadership or decision necessary information with leadership if leadership is making the decision. So if we were asked tomorrow, can you tell me who Patrick interviewed in his evaluation and share those notes? We wouldn't give them to a member of the press. We wouldn't give them to any of the 134 members other than legitimately to the speaker who is making the decisions in this case. And those are basically policies of the House that we've abided by. So in this case, if you applied those to what we're talking about with Jim, whoever you designate to do the interviews should interview people, carefully write up their notes, but hold them confidential to anybody except this executive committee. And the executive committee shouldn't share the notes and information any broader than necessary. It might be that, let's suppose that you get a positive comment, but everybody who you ask has one particular issue they want Jim to work on. You may find that it's not necessary to identify who identified that issue or why they identified it, even to Jim. But just to redact that and just say, we are hearing that you could benefit from better savvy in doing Zoom meetings or a training on that type of thing. And unless Jim questions it, I think you're probably done there. Jim would say, okay, I got it. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. McCormick. Mr. Botter?
So, Mr. Chairman, I agree with everything Mr. McCormick has said, and certainly it's consistently been the position of legislative staff and the legislature that the Data Practices Act doesn't apply to the legislature. A few nuances to add to what Mr. McCormick has said, perhaps. Certainly, if people providing feedback raised particular concerns about violations of any policies, it may be worth considering, exactly how broad the guarantee of confidentiality might be if that's provided. For example, harassment policies and so forth. And then the other small nuance when it comes to the executive branch is that to the extent there are interactions with the executive branch, executive employees would be covered by the Data Practices Act if they were in, and perhaps that's far-fetched, providing some form of feedback. If they had written notes or so forth, those might be covered directly by the Data Practices Act because they would be maintained by the executive branch. But I agree with everything Mr. McCormick has said, and certainly think, and understand the intent of Mr. Noble's question is you want to receive candid feedback from the employees who are providing and other staff who are providing that feedback.
I guess I'd add one more comment, which may sound self-serving, but I think is accurate. And that is that Tom and I are here to assist the executive committee, but we're not really in a position where we would take part in the actual evaluation of Jim. We're not, it would be kind of awkward where at best maybe Jim's peers, and so we shouldn't be actually part of evaluating him. So we wouldn't, for example, I don't think we would go interview senior members of OLI about Jim in this kind of a routine personnel evaluation. I'm just speaking for myself. I don't know about you, Tom, but I think that's accurate. That's how I feel about it.
Thank you, Mr. McCormick. Representative Hansen?
I think on that point, and that gets to the kind of the crux of who is the entity or how is the entity who does the review. So a self-review would mean that Jim would have access, the legislative auditor would have access to all that information, and would be involved in the conducting it. I think we need a third-party entity, and maybe the question to Mr. McCormick and Mr. Bodden is not that they are doing the interviews or the compilation, but they are the administrator or the entity that holds the interview, or not. I may not be describing it right, but is the facilitator that would have it involve the members. I'm concerned with us as members that we have our own LAs or staff that I don't think it's appropriate for them to be handling the information or setting up that any of those meetings. I'm not necessarily saying that Mr. Bodden and Mr. McCormick do that, but I think we need some entity for administering this. And maybe I don't know if Mr. McCormick or Mr. Bodden.
Mr. Chair, Representative Hansen, one approach would be to reach out to the new LCC director, Michelle Weber, who starts on November 15th. And I think just as an administrative matter, she would have the tools to schedule meetings and interviews and to kind of create the paper trail and the forms. And both Tom and I often help the LCC director do these things and would work with her. And also probably the LCC director would would look to the Senate and House personnel officers to help with this stuff too. And I think that you're establishing a precedent, and I think picking the right person is important. And my suggestion would be go to LCC Director Michelle Weber, and we would help her.
Thank you, Mr. McCormick. Representative Hansen, follow-up?
The follow-up question would be about the timeline. So when, and I don't know the answer to this, is when is the current LCC executive director departing? And is the deputy in a role before that? Because November 15th is kind of when we have to have this done. So Mr. Bodden or Mr. McCormick?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Bodden?
Michelle Weber will become the director of the LCC on October 15th. She's currently doing a lot of work on that transition already, and I think could be brought up to. I'm very hesitant to do all this. I don't necessarily want to, Pat's right. I think she's would be well suited for some of the tasks that you're discussing here. But there's certainly time there where she could begin to take on the task of scoping this and doing some of the background work that's necessary to meet that November 15th deadline. Pat and I can certainly take that to her and report back to give you a sense of whether it's a manageable task.
Thank you, Mr. Bowden. I think that'll be critical from the perspective of that, that's the mechanics of who do we identify? I think that was one of my questions is the senior staff. How do we identify them, get the time frame? And Representative Liebling brought up, do we designate a couple of our members in the LEC, likely to participate in those conversations? So that probably needs to happen as soon as we can, get our members identified and then get that schedule laid out. That can run parallel to all of the other activities that are moving. So with that, any other questions on this particular topic?
Well, I would just add that, thank you, Mr. Chair. Given the potentially difficult timeline, if we had to do this first one a little bit differently, kind of with the understanding that we don't have everything in place, I think that would probably be, personally, I think that would be okay. I mean, we can try to, I think Representative Hansen's point about not having our staff handle these things and so on is a good one. But if my LA had to set up some meetings for me regarding this to do it just this one time, and, I think it wouldn't be the end of the world. So I think it's more important to get it done than to get it perfect the first time, would be my comment.
Thank you, Representative Liebling. And I agree. I think by the mere fact that we're all in our basements and in our offices today remotely, we'll pose some challenges for us. So I assume a lot of it's going to be phone calls, Zoom meetings where we can, and to get those things rolling. So with that, we can to just talk about the timeframes. November 15th is the goal. Of course, we're going to have to complete the report, and that includes the legislative audit review, the review of the deputies, and then kind of in the conversation about seeking input from others, right, of the legislative staff. The other part, I think, and I just don't know that we're going to have time. Is there a role or an opportunity to have a conversation with some of the clients in the state agencies themselves? And so I guess pose that out there to seek guidance. You guys are embedded. I mean, you guys work so closely with so many of those agencies as well. I don't know that we have time, but we probably should have at least a cursory review of a couple agencies and get some feedback from them as well. Comments? Again, is everybody tired from lunch, awful quiet today. So with that then, I think the one thing that's going to drive it, so two major things. I think one, do we have to select a couple members that want to do those or do the interviews or kind of look at the senior staff within the Office of the Legislative Auditor. And then the other piece is really going to be driven based on Mr. Noble's. And really that self-assessment is going to be the foundation of kind of the production of the document. And then I envision a conversation between the chair and vice chair going through that entire document. And then I think collectively we need to work on, what are those challenges, the things we talked about right when we started, what's working, what's not, what is our future, and what are those key things that we're all better prepared and all on the same page of the same vision as we approach the next calendar year. So, Mr. Nobles, would love your thoughts. Oh, Representative England, you have a question first?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Before we go back to Mr. Nobles, I just had a thought from what you said that if we're going to do these and try to have a couple members do this, I think it would be really helpful to just have sort of a one-page bare bones kind of interview guide for the member who's, kind of like, do you have any comments in this area? Do you have any comments in this area? Just so that everybody kind of gets asked the same questions and whoever's doing it is, asking the same question, just in a really general way, giving them opportunity, but make sure that we say, I don't know. I wonder actually if Mr. McCormick and Mr. Boddern have something like that you use already when you assess people and ask their colleagues to comment on their performance, because otherwise it's just wide open, hey, what do you think? And I don't think we want to be doing that.
Thank you, Representative Lieberman. And I agree. And with that, probably a reminder to anybody participating is about the confidentiality in the role, just some guidelines, not only functional about the questions to ask, so for consistency, and then just a structure to document the process, but also probably some few guidelines about how we treat the data and what we capture and what the information we learn throughout the process. Mr. Boddern or Mr. McCormick, are you aware of any basic draft document that we could use as a foundation for this?
Mr. Chairman, off the top of my head, what I would have handy is what I've used to evaluate staff in my office and some of the questions we've asked the members they work closely with. That's certainly a starting point, but I think that's the kind of task that Mr. McCormick and I could certainly take on, working together with Michelle Weber to develop something like that, and agree with Representative Liebling that consistency is a good thing in that respect.
Thank you, Mr. Boddern. Mr. McCormick, any great protest to Mr. Boddern's committing you to that task?
It's all good.
Mr. Hanson, Representative Hanson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I just looked at the calendar, and the 15th of November is a Sunday. So I'm assuming we will probably need to meet on the 13th or the 12th. The 11th would be Veterans Day. So we've got to look in the window there. I think the task for us today is we need to have a formal recommendation to the full commission, and maybe to synthesize what we've heard so far is that we asked Mr. Boddern and Mr. McCormick to check with the new LCC coordinator to facilitate the review, and then we pick members to be involved in that review from the executive committee. That would be one thing. And then the second would be having Mr. Nobles conduct Ms. Randall's review, probably in conjunction with yourself and myself sometime, so that whenever that November meeting is, we would Ms. Randall's review, Mr. Noble's review, and maybe adopt a new or confirm a new deputy auditor for the financial auditor division. Is that kind of the timeline maybe Mr. Nobles or Mark, Chair, are looking at?
Thank you, Mr. Representative Hanson. No, I agree. I think you laid it out. And then I think the one piece, the interview grid, or guide, getting that taken care of, the LCC, the new director, Michelle, if Mr. Boddern and McCormick could take those tasks. We do need to identify those two members who want to kind of spearhead that. And then I think I agree with you, Mr. Hanson, or Representative Hanson, on the deputy auditor review, which I'm sure Mr. Nobles is already in the process of doing. And then I think really the key document is Mr. Nobles and that kind of that self-assessment of the legislative auditor, their successes and challenges and kind of what that future looks like producing that document. I think everything we've talked about we can start them now and run simultaneously to start getting it all moving. Mr. Nobles, the question I think would probably be the outstanding one. How long do you think it would take you to produce that self-assessment? I think you probably have we know you have it in your head. We just need to get it documented, and then focusing on, kind of the statistics of our reporting or those special reviews, your existing structure. And then, I'm looking for recommendations of the pros and cons of moving forward. We did a little bit about last conversation we had on the budget, right? What are the impacts of a cut, and, what does that do to the overall organization of the legislative auditor? But then really, what is that future? What's going to be our template that we work on for the next calendar year? And so with that said, how long do you think that will take you to produce that particular document?
Mr. Chairman, I think you said it correctly. It's in my head. It's always in my head every day. Not a day goes by that I don't think a lot about the Office of the Legislative Auditor, both the strengths and the challenges and the issues, problems that we have. So I'm always maybe optimistic about how much I can get done, and I'm always cautioned. I was going to say, I'll try to have something put together for you by the end of next week. So that would be my goal. Possibly then the review of the deputy the following week, by the end of the following week. Do those dates work? Do they get us where you need to be?
Mr. Nobles, I think it does. I think the key is going to be the greatest foundational document that we're working on outside of the collection of all the other data and the assessment is really your self-assessment, and what is that? I think that's certainly the bulk of the data that needs to be documented or provided to us. If you could get that, we could back into, if you get that targeted for the 9th, and I think Representative Hanson, I think we should commit to, setting up the face-to-face or whatever that meeting looks like, prior initial meeting based on the review or based on the document 3 days after we receive it, knowing that there could be a day or two, things happen and things aren't moving as quick as they'd like. Is that something that would work for everybody here?
I think maybe Ms. Randall can give us the time for the full commission meeting, and then I think if we got a couple motions to just formalize it, so we have a formal recommendation that we could make this work.
Ms. Randall?
Mr. Chair, Representative Hanson, well, our next Audit Commission meeting is scheduled for next Thursday, October 8th at 10 a.m. And then we don't have the next one scheduled yet. So we can schedule it around when these pieces of information are ready. So we can do it for mid-November. We had talked about a November meeting, so I think we can be flexible with that.
Thanks, Ms. Randall. Representative Hanson, any other questions? Paul?
I think Senator Klein's got his hand up.
Senator Klein.
Mr. Chair, and it's just to try to facilitate and offer a motion if needed. I guess with your guidance, Mr. Chair, I believe the motion that you're looking for is to have the deputy auditor perform Mr. Noble's performance review, and that Senator Curran and Representative Hanson then present that at the November meeting.
Senator Klein, we appreciate that motion. Any other conversation on the motion?
I think that was that Mr. Nobles conducts the deputy auditor's review with the input. I think that's what Senator Klein was saying.
Correct.
Senator, thank you, Senator Klein. So with that motion, any comment or conversation?
I would just again like to raise the issue of confidentiality. So the documents that I've been asked, I'm more than willing and would be eager for the assessment that I make of my own performance, but also of the status of the office. I'm fine with that being a public document. It would be unusual, though, for my assessment of any of the people that I supervise to become public. So I just put that out to you. I mean, if that document is going to be the subject of a discussion at a public meeting, I think I need to know that.
Mr. Nobles, I agree completely that the confidentiality of the staff must be maintained. So everybody here must make sure to, as we put together the guidelines, we need to preserve that confidentiality for your staff and you yourself as we go through this process.
Mr. Chairman, my point though is there will be meetings to discuss these items, and one of the things that the legislature doesn't really have, to the best of my knowledge, maybe Mr. Bodern or Mr. McCormick can correct me, but I don't know if there is a mechanism on any issue for the legislative committees or this commission to hold executive sessions that are not public. So, I mean, we can certainly have meetings that are restricted to certain members that are not streamed. But I raised the question because I don't know what the plans and expectations are for this. I, as we all know, not that long ago, there was a public meeting for my reappointment, and I was very comfortable with members expressing in the public what they felt about my performance. I think I should be subject to that. But since everybody else in the office is appointed by me, you confirm the deputies. I think I would prefer some assessment on your part of whether you want a document that can be discussed publicly, or you want a document that you will consider privately.
Thank you, Mr. Nobles. Mr. Bodern or Mr. McCormick, some guidance on Mr. Nobles' question?
Mr. Chairman, and Mr. Nobles is certainly correct. There are no provisions, or they're extremely limited within legislative open meeting laws and rules that would permit a closed hearing of a subcommittee or committee of any kind. I think in looking back on the document that the subcommittee adopted last year, the intent is for the chair and vice chair to deliver the performance appraisal privately. And that document could be used in providing that appraisal. I think the language calls for the chair and vice chair acting jointly must conduct an annual performance assessment. So I think that could be accomplished without a public meeting. The document and the report that result from that can be shared with the LAC, and I don't think that needs to be done through a public meeting. That, I think, is what the subcommittee adopted last year addresses the concerns that Mr. Nobles has raised. But certainly others may want to add on to that.
Great, thank you, Mr. Bodern. Mr. Representative Hansen?
I think that's why it's important, Mr. Chair, that we're handling these as two motions. And so this motion is implementing the policy that was adopted related to the deputy auditor review that stays within your zone, like you would be reviewing anyone else. The input comes from, if this passes, Senator Cran and myself that are involved in that. And the decision that comes back to the commission is that you've conducted the review. I mean, it's it's all within the lane of existing review and protections under the Data Practices Act. You are conducting it with our input.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr.
if I
Noble.
could just add one more point. I want to be clear, though, that while I'm appointed by the Legislative Audit Commission, I feel a strong commitment to the public. I mean, I serve the legislative branch, but much of the work we do is in the interest of accountability, transparency for the public's sake. And I would be quite comfortable if you want to make public your assessment of my strengths and my weaknesses, my challenges, and direction that you want to give me so that everybody, the other members of the legislature who are not members of the commission, can kind of know what was the result of all of this for the legislative auditor. Were there some things that you suggested needed change, and so that everybody can sort of know whether I'm being successful on making those changes or not. So I just wanted to let you know, I for myself, I am completely open to as much as you want to reveal as you want to reveal about your assessment, not only of myself, but you know, again, this will also be something of an assessment of the office. So what are our strengths as an office, and what are our challenges? And so I'm really happy that you're doing this, and I think it will serve not only the commission, but the full legislature and the public as well. So.
Thank you, Mr. Nobles. So with that, we do have Senator Klein's motion was to agree and direct the Mr. Nobles to perform and complete the review of the deputy auditor. Ms. Randall, was there any? Did I miss anything on that motion? Help me out, Judy.
Mr. Chair, there may also have been something in there about the self-assessment that Mr. Nobles needs to do. So I think the motion would be for Mr. Nobles to conduct the evaluation of the deputy legislative auditor, and then also conduct the self-assessment and provide those to the chair and vice chair. I'm not sure about the timeline. I think Mr. Nobles was giving himself 2 weeks for both of those tasks. So if you wanted to put October 16th on there, that would.
Ms. Randall, I think we had the legislative auditor self-assessment due on October 9th, and then the deputy review due on October 16th. And so
Perfect.
If we can make that the motion of directing the legislative auditor, Mr. Nobles, to complete the self-assessment by October 9th and the deputy review assessment by October 16th. Representative Hansen, any comment before we vote?
I would maybe suggest having two motions, because when we're dealing with Jim's review, we're going to be asking an external entity. We would be keeping it internal with the deputy, and that's where I think Senator Klein's motion was. We would adopt that and then go to Jim's review and involve the self-assessment, and then have that formal ask externally. I think that would be a better break, just so that we're clear in making recommendations to the full commission, if that's okay.
Great, thanks, Representative Hansen. Senator Klein, your motion to direct the legislative auditor to complete the deputy auditor review by October 16th.
So moved, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
So any further discussion, Representative Liebling? Oh, I saw you. I thought you made a motion. So with that, all those in favor say aye. Or
Aye.
thumbs up.
We may have
Those opposed, thumbs down.
Aye.
Motion. Oh, Representative Nelson. Okay, we got you. We got your vote. All those in favor, with motion carried. So with that, we have then, I believe, another motion. Senator Klein, would you like to make the motion for to have the legislative auditor complete self-assessment review by October 9th.
So move, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Although, Representative Hansen?
And that Mr. Bodern and Mr. McCormick asked the LCC staff to, new executive director, to facilitate.
So, well, in addition to the motion, we'll add for the legislative auditor to complete the self-assessment review by October 9th, and then to direct Mr. Bodern and Mr. McCormick to engage the LCC director, Michelle Weber, to help facilitate the required scheduled meeting or the required meetings in order to complete the review.
So moved.
Okay. Representative Leahley?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Do we need to include something about starting to work on a document that would frame these interviews, or can that be separate? Either way, I just want to make sure we don't forget about that piece.
I'm not sure that needs to be included in motion. We've already got the commitment from Mr. McCormick, Mr. Bodern to provide us with that task. And I'm sure there will be multiple things that will also, or functional steps that we'll have to take care of as well. So with that motion, all those in favor say aye, or raise your thumbs. Aye. No, everybody. Those opposed, thumbs down. Motion carries. All right. We got the review. I think the next thing is we've got to pick a couple members to help coordinate, as from the Legislative Audit Commission, who want to work with the Michelle Weber, the new director at the LCC, to try and coordinate those interviews with the staff or with the senior staff within the LEC, or within the Legislative Auditor's Office. Any suggestions? Any willing participants besides the chair and the vice chair? Slow down, you guys. Your enthusiasm is killing us here. We could if we can't identify, we don't have any volunteers here, we're going to have to we'll have to canvass all of our members to find those. And I guess we could do that. Representative Hansen, if nobody, I don't see any thumbs up from anybody. So I think you and I should take that task on and identify a couple members. We'll canvass all the members to see one from each party. And I think my opinion was we only need two. Just be great to have one from each party. And then that way we have equal representation. I think having more members than that will make it a little bit more complicated as far as just timing. So we will take that task on between the chair and myself to identify and canvass our members, all members of the LEC, to find two willing volunteers. And if they're unwilling, it's going to be a little more difficult to drag them into the process, but we'll get it done. What else is, Representative Hansen, any comments about our two members?
I would just say, if we don't find any willing volunteers, I think it'll be Senator Cran and myself that will be volunteering.
Fully agree.
And I would maybe give Ms. Randall and Mr. Nobles or Mr. Bodern and Mr. McCormick any final closing comments.
And any other comments from everyone? We've had a great discussion, so I think we have the framework for everything that we passed on this resolution or this modification from last year. So any other comments?
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to
Representative
say, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to say that, I think the two of you are a great team. And I just wanted to, I know that, this is like, don't thank me with extra work, right? I realize that, but I just want to say that I appreciate both of your willingness to stay on top of these things. And, I think we've got good leadership here between the two of you. We got bicameral, bipartisan, and two really thoughtful, good folks that can guide us in this thing. And so, if the two of you have the time and and are able to, I think it's fantastic. And, I hope the rest of us can step up as needed. I see Senator Benson probably wants to say something.
Thank you, Representative Laban. I appreciate the comments and the kind words. I do have a bone to pick with you about this part-time role that we serve in. When you ever find that, let me know. All right. With that, Senator Benson.
No, Mr. Chair, I just turned on my video so that you knew if we needed motions or votes that I could be accounted as in attendance, not hidden on my screen. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator Benson. Any other comments? Mr. Nobles, any closing remarks for today's meeting?
Just again to thank you. I think this is a really good move forward. I think there's always, even on the part of the folks at the OLA, a desire to find a way to bring us closer with the commission, to have you more aware and knowledgeable about what we're doing, what our concerns and challenges are. And so I really appreciate this. I think it's going to be a very positive process, and I look forward to the input that you provide to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nobles. Anybody else? Any other closing comments before we end? Well, excellent. Well, we appreciate it, and I think there was some apprehension when we went through this process last year, but I do think it will provide great structure. As being somebody new to the part-time role that we serve in the legislature, a very honorable role, to have some structure and some guidance for those that follow us, I think is going to be really helpful. I think this is one of the really good things that we do as far as the nonpartisanship nature and the necessity for us to really work together to preserve the institution of the Office of the Legislative Auditor. It is critical, but I know it's happened informally as far as the legislators working with you, Mr. Nobles, and all of your great staff. But to have it formally documented, I think really helps any of those that come after us, or in the next Legislative Audit Commission. Not having those things identified, just the basic understanding of what's necessary, I think can hinder anybody new coming in, and may challenge the institution of what is the Office of the Legislative Auditor. And so I think for me, it's really beneficial to have the guidance, and more importantly, to continue to build on the relationship that we as the Legislative Audit Commission are making sure we're all attuned into exactly what those things are that you do, and exactly how we can make sure that you're the most effective possible. And it's going to take a joint effort from every one of us. And so, to me, I think there's no such thing as anything's going to be perfect. We're going to do a very good job to make sure everybody understands what you do and how we're going to work forward to make sure that you're as valuable as possible for the citizens of Minnesota, and absolutely the legislature. You are the eyes and ears for us, and we absolutely appreciate it. So with that, if no other comments, we'll end our the executive subcommittee meeting, and wish everybody a wonderful weekend and enjoy the first cool days of the year. So thank you.
Thank you.